I'm Detective Superintendent Jayne Crossling from the Australian Federal Police, and I'm based at the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, where we also run the Human Exploitation Command. The Australian Federal Police has a key remit when it comes to Commonwealth law. So where there are Commonwealth criminal offences, usually the Australian Federal Police has primacy, and that definitely extends to human trafficking offences. So we have dedicated human trafficking teams in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, and in every other capital city we have very well trained investigators who not only are trained in engaging with victims and possibly hearing their stories and getting those stories down in an evidential way in case we can later use that in a prosecution, but also they will be able to assess whether or not there are actual criminal offences identified. And that's all forms of human trafficking and slavery, and that can include trafficking both into and out of Australia. It can include forced marriage, it can include debt bondage, servitude, sexual servitude, and there are other associated offences that come along with those particular crime types as well. We've had 340 reports for the last financial year, but we strongly suspect that there are far more out there. The AEFP partners very closely with the Australian Institute of Criminology, and they produced a landmark report that we often quote that indicates that for every victim that we become aware of, there are 4 more undetected. Now, our feeling is that perhaps it's even greater than that. So it's fair to say it's a severely underreported crime. And typically a breakdown of those 340 reports will show that forced marriage continues to be the largest category of reports that we receive. And then that's probably followed by trafficking, including exit trafficking. That's a very, very large proportion as well. So those two in particular seem to be our strongest sources of reports. We at the Australian Federal Police have an understanding that the public probably has some outdated notions of what slavery actually looks like, and they may have those notions that there needs to be that form of physical restraint. But the actual scenarios that we see and the reports that we receive show that slavery and similar practices can play out in lots of different ways. So I think we need to make sure that everybody understands that there are lots of different ways in which people can be manipulated, coerced, and made to feel like they don't have any other option. So that can include the fact that there's threats against them. It could be threatening to have things taken away from them, threatening repercussions either on them or potentially, we have certainly seen, on their family members overseas. They could have forms of restraints where perhaps they're not allowed to leave a residence overnight. They may actually be locked in. And there are other instances when passports have been removed, which really is a barrier. There's a very, very broad range of victims that we see. They come from all walks of life, certainly all different forms of cultural and religious backgrounds, as well as at times different socio-economic backgrounds as well. So there's sort of no one typical victim that we've seen, but there is an element of vulnerability that has been exploited by an offender. We certainly see from some of the victims that we interact with that they haven't necessarily understood that in Australian law they are possibly a victim. They may not realise that we actually have certain laws that protect them, and that the circumstances in which they find themselves or the experiences that they've been through are actually amounting to a criminal offence. Australian Federal Police has a really important role when it comes to the identification of victims and then assessing them to see whether or not they can be placed on the federal government's Support for Trafficked People program. So this program is incredibly important and valuable. It's run by the Australian Red Cross in Australia, and it's administered by Department of Social Services at a federal level. So this program allows victims that we identify, that we do an assessment process with, to be placed on this particular program should they consent to be, and that will allow them to be offered a variety of support services, including housing, access to legal advice, access to having their visa status examined, and potentially working with Border Force to have their visa status regularised. The Australian Federal Police has a key role and remit to help educate the public in relation to the indicators of human trafficking, and they are very broad, which can make it a little bit challenging. But some of the more obvious ones that we would like the public to turn their mind to include the fact that a person may appear to be under the control of somebody else, where their movements are perhaps curtailed by someone. They may appear to be in fear of somebody and show tension if they're not home by a certain time. And some of that can also be related to domestic violence as well. So that's potentially an overlapping red flag as well for domestic violence. If perhaps a person presents as not having access to money, that they are constantly surveilled by somebody, these are the sorts of signs that perhaps somebody that's connected to a possible victim could be turning their mind to understand, you know, what might be going on in that particular circumstance. There's a lot of information on the Australian Federal Police website about human trafficking, including all of those indicators that we've talked about, and then what to do if you had concerns, and whether or not you felt it was a policing matter or not. So that is definitely a very big source of information, and from what we understand, it is well received by the public, and it's in very, very plain language. But certainly the AFP website has a web form, and it is a very, very simple step to just raise your concerns. That will be triaged very, very quickly by our national centre and sent to the teams in our relevant state and territory commands. But there are other services available out there. The My Blue Sky website that's run by Anti-Slavery Australia is certainly another resource that we definitely recommend, and we do.